A millionaire buys flowers from a scarred woman and her son on the street. Days later, he knocks on her door but is chased away by... The rhythmic hum of the engine filled the cabin of Nathan Warburton's Bugatti, a soundless symphony of power and control. The air inside was scented faintly with leather and the sharp tang of his aftershave, a meticulously curated environment designed to insulate him from the chaos of New York City's streets. Outside, horns blared and pedestrians wove between cars, clutching briefcases and coffee cups as if their lives depended on it. Nathan barely noticed them. His phone vibrated on the console, drawing his attention. A quick glance revealed another stream of emails, projections for the upcoming quarter, questions from his board of directors. His finger hovered over the screen, ready to respond, when a movement at the corner of his eye pulled his gaze to the sidewalk. It was a woman, standing beneath the harsh glare of a stoplight. She was young, but her face bore a jagged scar that cut from her temple to her cheek, a story etched in flesh. In her hands, a bouquet of roses wrapped in crinkled cellophane trembled slightly against the wind. Beside her, two boys, one clutching her coat, the other holding a bundle of daisies, stood as still as sentinels, their faces pale in the winter sun. The boys. The taller one, perhaps 6 years old, leaned slightly into the street, his hand raised toward the line of cars. His brown hair, cut in uneven waves, framed a face that struck Nathan like a blow. The sharp cheekbones, the deep green eyes that mirrored his own. Nathan's chest tightened, his grip on the steering wheel adjusted involuntarily. He blinked, leaned forward as if that could bring clarity, and studied the younger boy still standing by his mother. The resemblance was uncanny. The taller boy approached his car window, eyes wide and hesitant. He didn't speak right away, and Nathan noticed his hand shake slightly as he held up the flowers. "Sir, would you like to buy some?" the boy finally asked, his voice small but steady. Nathan hesitated. His eyes darted to the woman standing far away. She didn't look at him. Her attention instead fixed on arranging the remaining flowers in her hand. Her hands moved quickly but not fluidly. Her fingers trembled slightly. "How much?" Nathan asked, his tone colder than he intended. $5, the boy replied. Nathan fumbled with his wallet and pulled out a 20. He pushed it through the cracked window. "Keep the change," he said, his voice clipped. The boy's face lit up with a shy smile, but before he could say thank you, the light turned green. Horns blared from behind Nathan's car, jolting him. He pressed the accelerator without thinking, leaving the woman and the boys behind. By the time Nathan reached his office, the city's chaotic rhythm had returned to its usual background hum. The murmurs of his staff and the faint scent of fresh coffee greeted him as he entered the modern, glass-walled space. But something wasn't right. He sat at his desk, staring blankly at his schedule. Emma's voice came over the intercom, but her words barely registered. He tried to focus on his meeting notes and the projections he was supposed to review, but the boys' faces kept rising to the surface of his thoughts. Nathan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He didn't like distractions, and he didn't like mysteries. The resemblance couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just in their faces. It was in their posture, the way they held themselves with a quiet strength that seemed at odds with their circumstances. And the woman. Her face had been partially hidden, her gaze deliberately avoiding his, but there was something familiar in the curve of her jaw, the set of her mouth. Nathan stood abruptly and paced to the window overlooking Manhattan. His reflection stared back at him, the same green eyes that had haunted him at that intersection. Memories threatened to surface, fragmented, blurred images of another life, another time, but he pushed them down. "Mr. Warburton?" Emma's voice broke through his thoughts. "The directors are waiting for you." "I'll be there shortly," Nathan replied, though his voice carried none of its usual authority. That evening, back in his penthouse apartment, Nathan sat alone in the dim light of the city skyline. The bouquet of flowers, crushed from the ride, sat on the counter where he had thrown it. He picked it up absent-mindedly, inhaling the faint scent of roses and lavender. The boy's eyes wouldn't leave him. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were more than strangers on a street corner. Nathan reached for his phone, dialing the number of his head of security. "I need you to find someone," he said, his voice steady now, resolute. As he hung up, he turned back to the city lights, his reflection a shadow against the glass. For the first time in years, Nathan felt the uneasy stirrings of something he couldn't name. Something that told him he wasn't prepared for the truth that awaited. Nathan Warburton sat in his office, the midday sun slicing through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Stephen Cook, the investigator he had hired just 48 hours earlier, placed a manila folder on the polished desk. "Mr. Warburton," Stephen began, his voice low and measured. "This is everything I could find in the time frame you gave me. There's more, but this should give you a starting point." Nathan nodded, but he didn't reach for the folder right away. His hands rested loosely on the desk, a deliberate calm masking the tension in his jaw. "Let's hear it," he said. Stephen cleared his throat and flipped open the folder. "Her name is Dorothy Stewart, 36 years old. She was an economist before her accident 5 years ago, a hit-and-run that left her paralyzed from the waist down. Since then, she's been raising 2 boys, Alex and Eric Stewart. Both are 6 years old." Nathan's posture stiffened imperceptibly at the names. Stephen didn't pause, his tone remaining clinical. "She's been selling flowers at intersections for income, while occasionally doing small bookkeeping jobs. No other family that I could trace. Her financial situation is precarious. Past eviction notices, medical debts. She's managing, but barely." Nathan leaned forward, his fingers tightly together. "And the father?" "No mention of a father on record. Both boys bear her last name. There are no paternity claims filed." Stephen glanced at Nathan, his gaze sharp but unreadable. "However—" "Go on," Nathan pressed, his voice quieter now. Stephen pulled out a photograph and slid it across the desk. It was a candid shot of Dorothy when she attended a community event a few months ago. Despite the years etched into her features, Nathan recognized her immediately. The air in the room seemed to shift. He didn't touch the photo. Instead, his gaze lingered, his mind already pulling him back to another time. It was late spring, years ago, when Nathan had last seen her. They'd been standing under the ivy-covered archway of their university, a small cluster of friends, laughing about futures they had no way of predicting. Dorothy had been vibrant, opinionated, and endlessly curious. He remembered the tilt of her head when she challenged him, and the way she made even trivial arguments feel electric. But it was the night of the graduation party that returned to him most vividly. The two of them had slipped away from the crowd, their inhibitions dulled by cheap champagne. Underneath the warm haze of streetlights, she had looked at him with something unguarded, something he hadn't allowed himself to reciprocate. He had left for New York the next morning, brushing off the memory as fleeting. Now, staring at the image of her in that chair, the color drained from her once bright face, he felt a weight settle heavily in his chest. "Anything else?" Nathan asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Stephen hesitated, then produced a second sheet of paper. "She tried to contact you several times after the boys were born. Emails, letters. There are notes in her financial records about a lawyer she hired to locate you, but there's no evidence of follow-through. It seems she hit a dead end." Nathan frowned. "I never received anything. No letters, no emails." Stephen's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Are you certain?" It's unusual for every attempt to fail unless... He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Nathan exhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair. He pressed his palms into his thighs, grounding himself against the flood of unease creeping up his spine. Unless what? Unless someone intercepted them, Stephen finished. It's worth considering. But for now, this is what I've got. Nathan stood abruptly and turned to the window, staring out at the endless stretch of buildings. His reflection stared back at him, the sharp lines of his face unyielding, but his mind churned. Dorothy had tried to reach him, and failed, because someone, perhaps deliberately, had made sure she couldn't. Stephen packed up his briefcase and stood. "I'll keep digging, Mr. Warburton. Let me know if there's anything else you need." Nathan didn't respond immediately. His hand was resting on the desk, fingertips brushing the edge of the photograph. Finally, he said, "Find out everything. The lawyer, the attempts to contact me, everything. I want names." Stephen nodded and left silently. As the door clicked shut, Nathan lowered himself back into his chair. He picked up the photograph, holding it at an arm's length as though proximity might alter its reality. Dorothy's eyes, though distant in the image, seemed to cut through him like glass. It wasn't just guilt that gnawed at him. It was something deeper, a recognition of how profoundly he had failed her, whether intentionally or not, around the photograph. For the first time in years, Nathan felt the foundations of his meticulously constructed life begin to tremble. The Bronx was a different world. As Nathan Warburton parked his sleek car on a narrow street, the glaring mismatch between its polished exterior and the worn brick buildings surrounding him struck hard. Laundry lines stretched between windows. The smell of frying food lingered in the air, mixing with the distant wail of sirens. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. He was used to control, to knowing how the world moved around him. Here, in the quiet chaos of this neighborhood, he felt out of place, an outsider stepping into a story that wasn't his yet. Nathan adjusted his suit jacket and stepped out. His shoes clicked against the uneven pavement as he approached the address Stephen had given him. The building loomed in front of him, its bricks worn with time. He hesitated at the door, his reflection faintly visible in the smudged glass. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what to say or what to expect. He pressed the buzzer. A faint shuffle came from the other side, then a child's voice. "Mom, there's someone at the door." Moments later, the door opened slightly, the chain still in place. A boy's face appeared, round, curious, and strikingly familiar. Nathan's breath caught. "Hi," the boy said cautiously. His green eyes, the same shade as Nathan's, narrowed slightly. "Who are you?" Before Nathan could answer, a woman's voice called out, "Alex, I told you not to open the door for strangers." The boy turned his head, muttering something inaudible. The door closed briefly, and the sound of the chain sliding back echoed. Then the door opened wider, and there she was. Dorothy Stewart stood before him. Her face, older and marked by a jagged scar running down her cheek, was a stark reminder of the years that had passed. Her green eyes, once bright with curiosity, were now guarded, piercing him with a mix of recognition and disbelief. "Nathan," she said, her voice sharper than he remembered. "Dorothy." He stepped back slightly, as though giving her space might soften the moment. Her gaze swept over him, her hand tightening on the edge of the door. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," Nathan said simply. "And the boys." "The boys?" Her expression hardened. "Why? You've never cared before?" Nathan flinched at the bitterness in her tone. "I didn't know, Dorothy. About you. About them. I swear I didn't know." Her laugh was short and cold. You didn't know? She opened the door fully now, her scar catching the faint light from the hallway. You expect me to believe that? I tried, Nathan. I tried to tell you. Letters, emails, everything. You ignored me. I didn't receive anything, he said, his voice steady but pained. I had no idea. You didn't want to have an idea, she cut in. People like you don't. Behind her, two small faces peeked around the corner. Alex, the older boy, stared at Nathan with quiet suspicion. His posture was rigid and protective. The younger one, Eric, leaned closer, curiosity etched into his features. Nathan's eyes softened when he saw them. Are those... They're my sons, Dorothy said, stepping slightly to block his view. They don't know you, and I don't want them to. Nathan's mouth opened, but no words came. He felt the weight of her anger, the depth of her hurt. It wasn't just in her voice. It was in the lines of her face, the way she stood like a shield between him and the boys. Dorothy, he said quietly, I didn't come here to disrupt your life. I just want to understand. Her grip on the doorframe tightened. You want to understand? Then let me spell it out for you. I raised them alone. I worked every job I could find while paying off hospital bills. That scar, she pointed to her cheek. That scar is a reminder of the accident that almost killed me. And you? You were nowhere. I didn't know, Nathan repeated, his voice faltering. Then why are you here now? She demanded, her voice cracking. Nathan looked at her, then at the boys who still hovered in the hallway. Because they're my sons too, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Dorothy's expression froze, her eyes narrowing. You don't get to claim them now, she said, her voice sharp as glass. You don't get to show up years later and decide you're part of their lives. I'm not here to take anything from you, he said, his hands raised slightly in surrender. I want to know the truth. The truth? She laughed bitterly. The truth is, we don't need you. We never did. So do me a favor, Nathan. Leave. The words stuck, but Nathan didn't move. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and then at the boys who had disappeared back into the apartment. I'm not leaving, he said softly, his jaw tightening. Not until I find out what happened. Dorothy's voice dropped to a low, warning tone. If you don't leave, I will make you. Nathan hesitated for a moment, then nodded, stepping back. I'll go for now, he said. But this isn't over. She slammed the door, leaving him standing alone in the dimly lit hallway. For the first time in years, Nathan felt truly powerless. But he wasn't done. Not yet. Nathan sat in his dimly lit office, the folder from Stephen still open on the desk. The photograph of Dorothy lay on top, her scarred face staring up at him like a haunting reminder of choices he didn't remember making. Stephen stood nearby, arms crossed, his sharp gaze studying Nathan's reaction. You're certain she tried to contact me? Nathan asked, his voice flat, but his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the table. Stephen nodded. Her attempts are well documented. The letters, the emails, they were sent. The question is why you never saw them. Someone intervened, Mr. Warburton. Nathan's lips pressed into a thin line. Who? Stephen shrugged slightly, his posture deliberate. That's what I'm trying to find out. But sometimes the answer isn't in the files. It's in the people around you. Nathan looked up sharply. People around me? Stephen leaned forward, resting his palms on the desk. Think about it. Someone had access to intercept those messages. Someone close enough to know your schedule, your habits, maybe even your email. You were busy building your empire back then. Who did you trust with your life? Nathan leaned back in his chair, the question settling uncomfortably in his mind. Faces from the past flickered through his memory like old photographs, assistants, colleagues, friends. And then, unbidden, one name surfaced. Charlotte. He exhaled slowly, his fingers stilling. Charlotte had been his girlfriend for 2 years after college, right around the time Dorothy's emails and letters would have arrived. She had been sharp, charming, and fiercely protective of him. Sometimes too much so. Charlotte, Nathan said aloud, almost to himself. Stephen tilted his head. Charlotte? My ex-girlfriend. We were together for a while after I graduated, Nathan explained, his voice quieter now, as though testing the name on his tongue. She was close to me during that time, too close maybe, Stephen's brow furrowed. Did she have access to your email? Your personal accounts? Nathan hesitated. It had been years since he thought about her, but the details began to resurface. Charlotte had been meticulous, the kind of person who thrived on order. She'd often taken it upon herself to help him manage his chaotic schedule, checking emails and organizing meetings. At the time, it had seemed thoughtful. Now it felt calculated. She could have, Nathan admitted, his voice colder now. I trusted her completely back then. Stephen nodded. If she had access, she might know something. Whether or not she was involved directly, it's worth asking. Nathan stared at the photograph of Dorothy again, a dull ache settling in his chest. His life had been so carefully curated, every step measured and deliberate. The idea that someone he had once trusted implicitly could have played a role in this mess made his stomach churn. I'll contact her, he said finally, his jaw tightening. Later that night, Nathan sat in his penthouse, scrolling through his contacts. Charlotte's number had long been deleted, but it wasn't hard to find. She was still prominent in certain social circles, her name occasionally appearing in business columns or society pages. He hesitated for a moment before dialing, his thumb hovering over the screen. When the line finally connected, a smooth, familiar voice answered. Hello? Charlotte, Nathan said, his tone steady. It's me. There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. Then her voice returned, warmer this time, but tinged with surprise. Nathan, it's been a while. To what do I owe the pleasure? Nathan leaned back in his chair, his free hand gripping the armrest. We need to talk. In person. Charlotte laughed softly, the sound calculated. Straight to the point, I see. Well, I can't say I'm not intrigued. When and where? Tomorrow. Midtown, he said. I'll text you the details. Seeing Charlotte again would stir up memories he'd rather leave buried. But this wasn't about nostalgia. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how much it hurt. By the time Nathan arrived at the upscale cafe in Midtown, Charlotte was already seated. She sipped her espresso delicately, her manicured fingers wrapped around the porcelain cup. Her polished appearance hadn't changed. She still carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling a room. But when her eyes met Nathan's, a flicker of unease rippled across her face. Nathan, she greeted, her tone attempting lightness but betraying a hint of apprehension. Charlotte, he replied curtly, pulling out the chair opposite her. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. We need to talk. Her smile faltered. This sounds serious. What's on your mind? Nathan leaned forward, his expression hard. Dorothy Stewart. The name landed like a stone between them. Charlotte's hand stilled mid-reach for her cup. She recovered quickly, setting it down gently, but her eyes darted to the side for a fraction of a second. I haven't heard that name in years, she said, forcing a smile. Why bring it up now? Don't play games with me, Charlotte, Nathan snapped. I know you helped my mother intercept her messages, emails, letters, all of it. Charlotte's composure cracked. She exhaled sharply, looking away before meeting his gaze again. "Nathan, it wasn't my idea." Her voice wavered, and for the first time, the veneer of control began to peel away. "Then whose idea was it?" he demanded, though he already knew the answer. "Sharon," Charlotte admitted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your mother." Nathan leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Explain." Charlotte hesitated, then spoke, her words spilling out as if they had been waiting to escape for years. Sharon found out about Dorothy shortly after graduation. She saw the emails Dorothy sent and she decided they were a problem. She said Dorothy would ruin your future, distract you, and take you off track. Nathan's knuckles whitened as his grip on the table edge tightened. "So, what? You just went along with it?" Charlotte swallowed, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't want to. But Sharon, she has a way of making you feel like you don't have a choice. I was young, insecure. I wanted to stay in her good graces, and I thought..." "You thought sabotaging someone's life was the answer." Nathan's voice rose, anger boiling just beneath the surface. Charlotte flinched, but held his gaze. "I didn't know how far it would go. She asked me to delete the emails and send fake responses from your account. She said it was for your own good and that you didn't need the distraction. And I believed her." "Fake responses?" Nathan's voice was low, dangerous. Charlotte nodded, her eyes glassy. "I sent them, pretending to be you. Things like, 'Don't contact me again and I've moved on.'" Her voice cracked. "Nathan, I hated myself for it. But once I started, I didn't know how to stop." Nathan pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. He turned away, pacing to the large windows that overlooked the street below. The weight of her confession pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. "You had no right," he said finally, his voice cold. "No right to make that decision for me. For her." "I know," Charlotte whispered. "I know. And I've carried that guilt ever since. You have no idea how many nights I've lain awake thinking about her and about what I did. When I saw the photo of her in that article a few years ago, the one about her accident, I wanted to reach out. But I couldn't." Nathan turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Why not?" "Because I was a coward," she admitted, tears now pooling in her eyes. "I didn't want to face what I'd done. And because your mother, she still thinks she was right. She still believes everything she did was justified." Nathan's chest tightened. He had always known his mother was controlling, but this was a new level of betrayal. "You're saying Sharon still doesn't regret what she did?" Charlotte shook her head. "She thinks she saved you. She doesn't care what it cost Dorothy, or you." Nathan stood silently, his mind racing. The picture was clearer now, but the clarity brought no relief. His mother's influence had not only shaped his career, but had also destroyed lives in the process. "Nathan," Charlotte said, her voice breaking through his thoughts, "I know there's nothing I can do to fix this, but I'm sorry. Truly." He studied her for a long moment. She looked smaller than he remembered, her confidence stripped away by guilt and time. "Sorry doesn't undo what's been done," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan turned toward the exit, his mind already moving to the next confrontation. "You should have told me the truth years ago." As he walked away, Charlotte called after him, "Nathan, if you confront Sharon, be careful. She doesn't like losing control." He didn't respond. Her warning echoed in his mind, but it didn't matter. His path was set. The family estate loomed before Nathan like a monument to power and control. The sprawling gardens, meticulously trimmed, gave way to the stately facade of the house where he had grown up. a place that had once felt like home, but now carried an oppressive weight. He strode through the grand doors without hesitation, the echoes of his footsteps swallowed by the silence of the cavernous foyer. Sharon Warburton waited in the sitting room, poised as if she'd known he was coming. Dressed immaculately in a cream suit, her silver hair was swept back, every strand in place. She looked up from her tea as he entered, her expression cool and unreadable. "Nathan," she greeted, her voice calm, almost welcoming. "This is a surprise." Nathan didn't sit. He stood at the center of the room, his presence like a storm brewing against her calm. "We need to talk." Sharon's eyes narrowed slightly, though her composure didn't waver. She set her teacup down with deliberate precision. "About Dorothy Stewart," he said bluntly, watching for a reaction. For a moment, there was none. Then, her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightening ever so slightly on the edge of the table. "I see," she said finally, her tone measured. "So, you've been digging into the past." "Not the past, Mother," Nathan said sharply. "The truth. Something you've clearly gone to great lengths to hide." Sharon exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. "Nathan, sit down. You're being dramatic." He remained standing, his jaw tightening. "I know what you did. You intercepted Dorothy's letters, erased her emails and sent fake responses. You made her think I wanted nothing to do with her." Sharon tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. "Nathan, I was protecting you. That girl, her name is Dorothy," he interrupted, his voice rising. "And she wasn't just some girl. She was someone I cared about, someone who tried to reach me because she needed help." "She was a distraction," Sharon said firmly, her tone hardening. "You had just graduated, Nathan. You were building your career, your future. Do you really think you would be where you are today if you had been saddled with her and 2 children? Nathan flinched as if she had slapped him. "They're my children, Mother," he said, his voice quieter but no less intense. "You kept that from me. You made decisions for me that weren't yours to make." "I made the decisions you couldn't," Sharon shot back, her voice icy. "You were too young to understand what was at stake. I saw the bigger picture. I always have." Nathan took a step closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't get to decide what's best for me. You don't get to decide who I should care about or who I should help. You didn't just interfere. You destroyed lives." Sharon's eyes flashed, the first real crack in her calm facade. "I saved yours," she said, her voice rising. "You think this empire builds itself? You think you'd have the luxury of standing here accusing me if I hadn't made the hard choices?" "This isn't about the business," Nathan snapped. "It's about people, real people, who suffered because of your arrogance." Sharon stood now, her stature as imposing as the house itself. "You've always been too sentimental, Nathan. Too willing to let emotions cloud your judgment. That's why I had to step in. Dorothy would have dragged you down, and you know it." "I know nothing of the sort," Nathan said, his voice low and steady now, anger tempered by resolve. "Because you never gave me the chance. You decided for me, and I will never forgive you for that." They stood in silence, the tension thick and unyielding. Sharon's gaze softened slightly, her tone lowering. "Nathan," she said, almost pleading, "I did it because I love you, because I couldn't bear to see you throw everything away." Nathan stared at her, a mixture of anger and sadness in his eyes. "If that's your version of love, I want no part of it." Sharon straightened, her expression hardening again. "And what do you plan to do now? Run to her? Play the hero?" "I plan to fix what you broke," he said firmly. "I don't care if you approve or not." Sharon's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You're still naive, Nathan. You think she'll welcome you back with open arms. You think those boys, her boys, will see you as anything but a stranger? Nathan's jaw tightened. They're my boys, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I don't need your approval. I don't need anything from you. Sharon stepped closer, her voice a razor's edge. If you think this is over, you're mistaken. I won't let you throw your life away over this. Not now. Not ever. Nathan met her gaze, unflinching. It's not your decision to make anymore. Without another word, he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing through the house. As he stepped outside, the cold evening air hit him like a slap, but it was nothing compared to the storm raging inside him. He had faced his mother, uncovered her lies, and made his choice. But the battle was far from over. Sharon wasn't one to back down, and neither was he. Leaving the Warburton mansion, Nathan found himself another destination. Not flashy, but warm. Nathan adjusted his tie nervously as he stood in front of Dorothy's apartment building, clutching a small bag of books and toys he'd hastily picked up on the way. The place was more familiar now, though no less humbling. He knew he didn't belong in this world, but if he was going to repair the damage, this was where he needed to be. He knocked on the door, his stomach twisting in knots. After a long pause, the door opened slightly, revealing Alex's sharp green eyes. "It's you again," Alex said, his voice cautious. "It's me," Nathan replied with a tentative smile. He raised the bag slightly. "I thought maybe I could bring something for you and your brother." Before Alex could respond, Dorothy appeared behind him, her expression guarded. Her hand rested protectively on Alex's shoulder as she eyed Nathan. "What are you doing here, Nathan?" she asked, her tone cool. "I'm here to help," he said simply. "If you'll let me." Dorothy's gaze flicked to the bag in his hand, then back to his face. She opened the door wider, but didn't step aside. "Help? You think you can just walk in here with some toys and fix everything?" "No," he admitted, his voice soft. "But I want to try. Please, Dorothy, let me try." She hesitated, her eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity. "Do you see that today's story names many flowers? So, which is the favorite flower of the audience listening? Please leave the name of that flower in the comment section to let us know. Now let's go back to the characters." Finally, she stepped back, allowing him inside. "5 minutes," she said, curtly. Nathan entered, his steps careful as though afraid of disturbing the fragile peace of the small apartment. The living room was modest but tidy, filled with the warmth of a home, built with love rather than money. Eric was sitting cross-legged on the floor, playing with a small, well-worn truck. When he saw Nathan, Eric's face lit up with curiosity. "Hi." Nathan kneeled to his level, holding out the bag. "Hi, Eric. I brought you something." Eric's eyes widened as he peeked inside, pulling out a brightly colored kite. "A kite?" "I thought we could fly it together," Nathan said. Eric grinned and turned to Alex. "Can we, Alex?" Alex's expression remained cautious, but after a moment he gave a small nod. "Maybe." The park was a short walk away, the boys running ahead as Nathan carried the kite. Dorothy followed at a slower pace, her arms crossed. Nathan glanced back at her, his heart sinking at the visible walls she still held up. "You didn't have to come," she said quietly, keeping her gaze on the boys. "I wanted to," Nathan replied. "They're my sons too, Dorothy. I'm not going anywhere." She gave a soft, bitter laugh. "You say that now. Let's see how long it lasts." Nathan didn't respond. Instead, he focused on helping Eric and Alex untangle the kite string. It wasn't long before laughter bubbled out of Eric as the kite soared high into the sky, its bright colors vivid against the gray afternoon. Alex hung back at first, his watchful eyes never leaving Nathan. But as the minutes passed, he edged closer, his curiosity outweighing his caution. "You know," Nathan said, handing the string to Alex, "I used to love flying kites when I was your age." Alex took the string hesitantly, glancing up at Nathan. "You did?" Nathan nodded. "My dad used to take me. He wasn't great at it, but we always had fun." Alex studied him for a moment, before looking back at the kite. "You're not so bad at it," he muttered, a small crack in his guarded demeanor. Nathan smiled but didn't press further. That evening, back at the apartment, Nathan sat on the floor with Eric while they flipped through a picture book about animals. Alex sat nearby, pretending to ignore them, but clearly listening. Dorothy watched from the kitchen, her hands busy washing dishes, but her eyes kept drifting to the scene in the living room. Nathan's presence was unsettling, but seeing him with the boys, seeing the way Eric giggled at his silly voices and the way Alex's wary glances softened, stirred something in her she wasn't ready to name. Later, after the boys had gone to bed, Nathan stood awkwardly by the door. "Thank you for letting me spend time with them," he said. Dorothy leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "Don't think this means I trust you," she said, her voice sharp but quieter now. "They've been hurt enough. I won't let you add to it." "I understand," Nathan said, "but I'm not going to give up, Dorothy. I'll be here, as long as it takes." She didn't respond, but the slight flicker in her eyes betrayed the weight of his words. As he stepped out into the night, Nathan felt a small glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time, he felt like he was beginning to build something real, something worth fighting for. Leaving the Warburton mansion, Nathan found himself another destination, not flashy, but warm. The knocks on Dorothy's door became a routine, unwelcome, but persistent. Nathan Warburton, the man she had told herself never to rely on again, stood outside her modest apartment with a quiet determination that grated against her every nerve. Each time she opened the door, it was the same. A small gesture, a subtle attempt to wedge himself into her life. A bag of groceries one day, a new soccer ball for the boys the next. A book he said reminded him of his childhood. But Dorothy wasn't fooled. His polished demeanor and carefully chosen words couldn't mask the guilt radiating off him. She didn't want his help, and she certainly didn't want his guilt. "You can't keep showing up here," she told him one evening, her voice as sharp as the crackle of the peeling paint on her doorframe. Nathan, holding a neatly wrapped box of art supplies for the boys, didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to disrupt your life, Dorothy. I just want to be here for them." Her lips tightened. "They don't need you. We've been fine without you." "They deserve more than fine," Nathan replied evenly, though there was a weight in his voice that betrayed the steadiness of his words. "And so do you." Dorothy shook her head, her grip tightening on the edge of the door. "You don't get to decide what we deserve. You're too late, Nathan." From behind her, the sound of small, quick footsteps echoed down the narrow hallway. Eric peeked out from the corner, his eyes lighting up when he saw Nathan. "Mr. Warburton," he called, hurrying forward. His excitement pulled the corner of Dorothy's mouth into a frown. "It's just Nathan," he said with a small smile, crouching to meet the boy's gaze. "How are you, Eric?" "Good," Eric beamed. His eyes darted to the box. "Is that for us?" "Eric," Dorothy interjected, her tone firm. "Go back inside." "But," the boy began, only to stop when he caught the edge in her voice. He gave Nathan a sheepish glance before retreating to the living room, where Alex sat with a book, pretending not to notice the exchange. Dorothy turned back to Nathan, crossing her arms. "You're confusing them." Nathan straightened, his expression softening. They're my sons too, Dorothy. They deserve to know me. Her shoulders stiffened. They deserve stability. Not some fleeting interest you've suddenly decided to indulge in. It's not fleeting, he said quietly. I'm here to stay. For a moment, her expression wavered, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the wall she'd built. But she quickly masked it, stepping back into the safety of her apartment. That's what you said before, she muttered before shutting the door firmly between them. The days turned into weeks, and Nathan kept returning. Slowly, the rhythm of his presence began to disrupt the fragile routine Dorothy had so carefully constructed. The boys, despite her warnings, began to warm to him. Eric, with his endless curiosity and open heart, was the first to seek Nathan out. One afternoon, Nathan found himself in the park with the boys, a bright red kite struggling against the wind as Eric cheered him on. Alex stood off to the side, his arms crossed and his expression skeptical. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Alex called, his tone carrying the weight of his years of being the responsible one. Nathan glanced over his shoulder with a grin. "Not at all. Want to help?" Alex hesitated, his brow furrowing. But when Eric's laughter rang out, he sighed and stepped closer, his small hands joining Nathan's to steady the string. Dorothy watched from the distance, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The sight of Nathan laughing with the boys stirred something uncomfortable in her chest, something dangerously close to hope. She hated it. Back at the apartment, Eric climbed onto the couch, clutching the art supplies Nathan had brought earlier. "Look, Mum, he got us real paints this time." "That's nice, sweetheart," she said, her voice carefully neutral as she glanced at the vibrant box. Alex, quieter, approached her. "He's not that bad, you know," he said, his tone low but thoughtful. "He's trying." Dorothy looked down at him, her heart sinking at the cautious hope in his voice. She reached out, brushing a hand through his hair. "Trying isn't always enough," she said softly. That night, Dorothy sat alone in the small kitchen, an old photograph in her hands. It was of her and Nathan, taken on the steps of their university after graduation. She traced the edges of his face with her thumb, the anger in her chest dulling into something more complicated. Alex's quieter chuckle followed the sound of Eric's laughter as it entered the living room. She closed her eyes, leaning her head against the back of the chair. Nathan was worming his way into their lives, into their hearts. And no matter how much she wanted to keep him out, she couldn't deny the cracks forming in her defenses. But cracks weren't enough. Not yet. She would let him try for the boys' sake, but she wouldn't let herself believe. Not until he proved he wouldn't leave again. And this time, she would be ready if he did. Nathan sat at his desk, his brow furrowed as Stephen laid another file in front of him. The air in the office was thick with tension, the kind that comes when revelations begin to solidify into undeniable truths. "I found something you need to know," Stephen began, skipping any preamble. "It's about Dorothy." Nathan straightened in his chair, gripping the phone tighter. "Go on." There was a lawyer. "His name is Brian White," Stephen began, tapping the file. "Dorothy's lawyer at the time. She hired him to help locate you and secure financial support for the boys shortly after they were born." Nathan opened the folder, scanning through the pages. A photo of a balding man with a practiced smile stared back at him, his expression oozing a slick professionalism that Nathan immediately distrusted. "What did he do?" Nathan asked, his voice low and clipped. Stephen exhaled, his tone turning grim. Instead of helping her, he embezzled the retainer she gave him. From what I can gather, he funneled most of it into personal accounts and never made any serious effort to contact you. Worse, there are records of anonymous messages sent to her, threatening ones. He made her believe pursuing you would only bring her more trouble. Nathan's grip on the edge of the desk tightened. The weight of it all pressed down on him. Dorothy's struggles, her desperation, and the betrayal by someone she had trusted to help her. Stephen continued, "I've contacted a colleague in legal forensics. There's enough evidence to press charges. I've also flagged the money he stole. Most of it is still recoverable. If you want, we can ensure she gets every cent back." Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring at the photograph of the lawyer. Memories from that time began surfacing, unbidden. He recalled moments when he'd been too busy, too preoccupied to notice that something felt off, subtle signs of interference in his life that he had ignored. Emails that he had marked as read but never actually opened, calls he'd missed and hadn't thought to return. At the time, he'd chalked it up to the chaos of his burgeoning career. Now, he wasn't sure. "It's not just about the money," Nathan said quietly, his voice laced with guilt. "He made her feel unsafe. He manipulated her into giving up." Stephen nodded. "It's despicable, but we can make it right." The next day, Nathan sat in the office of his legal counsel, signing the papers to initiate legal action against Brian White. He didn't hesitate, each stroke of the pen a silent promise to himself and to Dorothy that he would fix this. It wasn't enough to absolve him of his guilt, but it was a step forward. When Dorothy found out, it wasn't from Nathan directly. It was through a letter from the recovery firm notifying her that her stolen funds were being returned. The news came with an additional letter from Nathan himself, folded neatly and tucked into the envelope. She stared at it for several minutes before finally opening it. "Dorothy, I've uncovered what Brian White did to you. I can't undo the harm he caused, but I can ensure you get back what was taken. He's being prosecuted, and you'll receive the full amount he stole. If you'd rather not deal with this personally, let me know, and I'll handle it all on your behalf. I don't expect this to change anything between us, but I couldn't let this go unanswered. I'm sorry. For everything. Nathan." Dorothy folded the letter carefully, her fingers lingering on the edges. Her emotions were a tangled mess of gratitude, anger, and confusion. She had spent years carrying the burden of that betrayal, believing she had made a mistake in trusting the lawyer. Knowing that Nathan had taken it upon himself to set things right, she didn't know how to feel. That evening, when Nathan knocked on her door, she hesitated before answering. When she finally opened it, her expression was guarded, her tone cautious. "I got the letter," she said, holding it up. Nathan nodded, his expression unreadable. "I just wanted to make sure you knew, and to tell you that if there's anything else, anything at all, I'll handle it." Dorothy studied him for a moment, the sincerity in his voice almost too much to bear. "Why are you doing this, Nathan? Is it guilt? Or do you actually care?" He met her gaze, the weight of her question hanging heavily between them. "I care, Dorothy, more than you'll ever know. But I also know that doesn't erase what you've been through." She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "It doesn't. But thank you for this." He nodded, not pressing further. "I'll leave you to it then." As he turned to leave, Eric appeared behind her, clutching the edge of her shirt. "Is Mr. Warburton going to stay for dinner?" "Eric," Dorothy said softly, glancing at Nathan. Nathan knelt to the boy's level, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Not tonight, buddy. But I'll see you soon, okay?" "Okay," Eric said, a hint of disappointment she could fully trust him yet. But for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he deserved the chance to prove himself. Meanwhile, at Warburton Mansion, Sharon sat at her desk in the Warburton estate, her fingers skimming over the glossy pages of a high-profile magazine. She wasn't particularly interested in the articles. They were more background noise to her racing thoughts. Her assistant had just delivered news that made her blood run cold. Nathan and Dorothy. Together, again. The very idea was enough to make her grip the magazine tighter, the edges bending under her fingers. She leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. It wasn't just about Nathan's reputation, it was about control. Dorothy Stewart represented everything Sharon had tried to keep from her son. Distraction, unpredictability, chaos, and now, her grandsons. Sharon's lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced at the photograph her assistant had included in the report. 2 boys, Alex and Eric. They had Nathan's sharp features, unmistakably tied to the Warburton family. She stared at the image for a long moment, the boys' innocent smiles tugging at something she didn't want to name. Nathan has 2 sons, she murmured to herself, the words tasting strange on her tongue. Her hand hovered over the phone before she finally dialed his number. The line clicked, and Nathan's voice answered, steady and firm. "Mother." "Why didn't you tell me?" Sharon asked without preamble, her tone sharp. "About the boys?" Nathan sighed on the other end. "Because I knew how you'd react." "They're my grandsons," Sharon said, her voice softening slightly. "I deserve to meet them." Nathan paused, his silence heavy. "Meeting them means respecting them." "And Dorothy." Sharon's jaw tightened, but she masked her irritation. "I'll meet them on my terms, Nathan. Make it happen." The boys were thrilled when Nathan announced they would meet their grandmother. Dorothy, however, stood silently in the corner, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "She insisted," Nathan said, catching her eye. His tone was calm but firm. "She wants to meet Alex and Eric." Dorothy's lips pressed into a thin line. "And what do you expect will happen, Nathan?" "She's going to magically accept them." "Me?" "I don't expect anything," Nathan replied evenly. "But they're my sons, Dorothy. And Sharon is their grandmother, whether we like it or not." Dorothy shook her head but didn't argue further. "Fine," she muttered. "But if she says or does anything to hurt them, I won't stay silent." The Warburton estate felt as imposing to Dorothy as it did familiar to Nathan. The boys, however, were wide-eyed as they stepped onto the manicured lawn, their excitement bubbling over. Alex, ever cautious, held on to Eric's hand as they approached the front steps. Sharon Warburton greeted them in the sitting room. Her usual air of superiority softened just slightly. She stood as they entered, her sharp gaze sweeping over Dorothy before landing on the boys. "You must be Alex and Eric," she said, her voice measured but not unkind. Eric stepped forward first, his natural curiosity shining through. "Yes, ma'am." "Are you really our grandma?" Sharon hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "I am." Eric's smile widened and he turned to Alex. "See? I told you." Alex, more reserved, nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." Sharon's gaze lingered on him, her expression unreadable. "It's nice to meet you too," she said softly. As the boys began exploring the room, their chatter filling the once silent space, Sharon's demeanor subtly shifted. She watched Eric tug at the corners of an ornate rug, and Alex study the paintings with quiet intensity. A faint smile tugged at her lips when Eric presented her with a drawing he'd made earlier that week. Eric held up the vivid drawing of a house in the midst of a forest and clouds and said, "This is for you." Sharon took it delicately, her eyes scanning the uneven lines and bold colors. "Thank you, Eric. It's beautiful." "Do you like it?" Eric asked eagerly. "Yes," Sharon replied, her voice warmer than Dorothy had ever heard it. "I do." Dorothy, standing near the doorway, watched the interaction with a mixture of surprise and unease. She caught Nathan's eye across the room, his subtle nod reassuring her. But the peace was short-lived. As the boys scampered off to explore the garden, Sharon turned her attention to Dorothy. "You've raised them well," she said, her tone neutral but edged. "Thank you," Dorothy replied, keeping her voice steady. Sharon's gaze sharpened. "But let's be clear. This doesn't mean I accept everything about this situation." Dorothy's jaw tightened. "And what exactly does that mean?" Nathan stepped forward, his voice firm. "Mother." Sharon ignored him, her focus solely on Dorothy. "You've brought chaos into my son's life. And now, into mine." Dorothy straightened, her voice like steel. "Your son brought himself into our lives, and if you have a problem with that, take it up with him, not me." Sharon's expression hardened, but before she could reply, Nathan intervened. "Enough," he said, his tone final. "This isn't about you, Mother. It's about the boys, and if you can't see that, then maybe you shouldn't be here." Sharon's lips thickened, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned toward the window, where Eric and Alex could be seen chasing each other across the lawn. "They're remarkable," she said, finally, almost to herself. Dorothy glanced at Nathan, her defenses still high, but for the first time, she saw a crack in Sharon's icy exterior. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was something. As they prepared to leave, Eric ran up to Sharon and threw his arms around her waist. "Bye, Grandma. See you soon." Sharon froze for a moment before awkwardly patting his back. "Goodbye, Eric." Alex offered a small wave, his shyness still intact. "Bye, Mum." "It's Grandma," Eric corrected with a grin, tugging his brother toward the car. Dorothy lingered near the door, watching Sharon carefully. "They don't need you to approve of me," she said quietly. "But they don't deserve your judgment either." Sharon didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the boys as they disappeared down the steps. Outside, Nathan placed a hand on Dorothy's shoulder as they walked to the car. "You stood your ground," he said softly. Dorothy exhaled, her walls cracking just slightly. "I always will. For them." Nathan nodded, his respect for her growing with every step. Together, they watched as the boys climbed into the car, their laughter a reminder of what mattered most. In the next few months, the small shop on the corner of Elm and Maple Street smelled of fresh paint and possibilities. Sunlight streamed through the wide front windows, illuminating rows of vibrant flowers in pots and vases. Dorothy stood in the center, her hands brushing over the counter she'd built with her own determination. The sign above the door read, "Bloom and Grow," and its simplicity filled her with pride. Eric darted between the shelves, carrying a watering can nearly as large as him, while Alex carefully arranged a bouquet for the display window. Their chatter filled the space, a soundtrack of laughter and curiosity that brought warmth to Dorothy's chest. Nathan stood in the doorway, his sleeves rolled up and a clipboard in hand. "What's next?" he asked, his voice lighter than she had heard it in years. "Inventory," Dorothy said briskly, though a small smile tugged at her lips. She wasn't ready to admit how much his steady presence had eased her transition into this new chapter of life. Alex turned, holding up a carefully wrapped bouquet. "What do you think, Mom?" "It's perfect," she said, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You're a natural." Eric, on the other hand, was less concerned with perfection. "Grandma would love these," he declared, pointing at a bunch of daisies. Dorothy stiffened slightly at the mention of Sharon, but she quickly masked it. "Maybe we can make her a bouquet," she said cautiously. Nathan caught the tension and gave her a reassuring nod. "She'll love it," he said. The bell above the shop door jingled, and Dorothy turned to see Charlotte standing hesitantly at the entrance, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. "Charlotte," Dorothy said, her voice unreadable. Charlotte offered a tentative smile, her hands twisting the ribbon around the bouquet. "I heard about the shop. It's beautiful, Dorothy. Truly." There was a moment of silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Charlotte stepped closer. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "For everything I did, for everything I didn't do, She paused, swallowing hard. "I let you suffer because I was too afraid to stand up to Sharon. And I've regretted it every day since." Dorothy studied her, the years of pain etched into her own face, softening slightly. "You let her manipulate you," she said quietly. "But you still made your choices." Charlotte nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to make things right if you'll let me." Dorothy glanced at the boys, who were busy stacking seed packets. She sighed, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "What are you offering?" "Time," Charlotte said earnestly. "Help. Whatever you need." She hesitated, then added, "I can't erase what I've done, but I can try to do better. For you. For them." For the first time, Dorothy allowed herself to consider the possibility. "All right," she said cautiously. "We'll see." Charlotte's smile returned, small but genuine. "Thank you." As the day wound down, Nathan stayed to help clean up while the boys played outside. Dorothy leaned against the counter, watching him fold empty flower wrappers with surprising precision. "You're good with them," she said quietly. Nathan looked up, his expression soft. "I'm trying to be better. For them. For you." Dorothy nodded, her heart still guarded but lighter than it had been in years. "I know." Outside, Eric's laughter rang out as he chased Alex with a garden hose. The sight made Dorothy smile, her grip on the counter loosening. This shop, these moments, they were hers now. And maybe, just maybe, she could share them without fear. Because after everything, new beginnings were what she'd built this life on. That weekend, the Warburton family dinner was a modest affair by their usual standards. Instead of a grand dining hall, Nathan insisted on using the cozy space in his townhouse, with a table just large enough for the family to gather around. A soft glow from the overhead chandelier cast warmth over the room as Alex and Eric carefully set out plates, their excitement palpable. Dorothy stood by the doorway, watching them with a cautious smile. She still wasn't sure about this, but the boys were thrilled, and that was what mattered. Nathan emerged from the kitchen carrying a roast chicken, his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened. "Dinner is served," he announced with exaggerated grandeur, earning a laugh from Eric and an eye roll from Alex. As they ate, Nathan cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "There's something I want to share with you all," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "This past year has been eye-opening for me. It's shown me how much I've missed and how much I still need to make up for." He glanced at Dorothy, who met his gaze briefly before looking down at her plate. "That's why I've decided to start a foundation," he continued. "It'll be focused on supporting single mothers and children, providing them with the resources and opportunities they need. Dorothy, your experience and the strength you displayed served as inspiration." Dorothy looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "Nathan, that's amazing," Eric finished for her, grinning. Alex, ever cautious, asked, "Does that mean you'll be around more?" Nathan turned to him, his expression softening. He stood and knelt beside Alex's chair, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I promise. I'll be here for you, for Eric, and for your mum. Always." Alex studied him for a moment before nodding, a small, hopeful smile breaking through his usual reserve. "Okay." Later that evening, as the boys played in the living room, Nathan found Dorothy in the kitchen, cleaning up. He leaned against the counter, watching her in silence, before speaking. "Do you believe me?" he asked softly. Dorothy paused, the dish towel in her hands falling still. She turned to face him, her expression guarded, but less cold than it had been. "I'm starting to," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to know that you won't let us down, that you won't let them down." Nathan stepped closer, his voice firm. "I won't. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you, if that's what it takes." Dorothy held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Just don't betray their trust. Or mine. I won't let it happen again." "You have my word," Nathan said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. The next day, the family stood in the park, the wind whipping gently at their faces. Alex and Eric ran ahead, each clutching a brightly colored kite that fluttered against the blue sky. Dorothy and Nathan walked slowly behind them, their shoulders brushing occasionally. As the boys' laughter filled the air, Dorothy glanced at Nathan. "This feels good," she said softly. Nathan looked at her, a small smile playing on his lips. "It does." From a distance, Sharon watched them, her usual composure softened by an expression of quiet contemplation. She didn't approach, didn't interrupt. Instead, she stood silently, watching as her son ran to help Eric untangle his kite string, his laughter mingling with the boys. For the first time, Sharon let herself acknowledge the bond forming before her. She wasn't ready to accept it fully, not yet. But as she turned to leave, she allowed herself a small smile. Under the wide open sky, the Warburtons and Stewarts began to fly, their kites soaring higher, a symbol of freedom, hope, and a future unbound by the weight of the past. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. Share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.